Hi, my name is Jayreid. I'm a psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And today I'd like to talk about shifting one's focus from the trauma of narcissistic abuse towards oneself in the process of recovery. In today's video, I'd like to talk about the gradual shift that happens in the recovery from narcissistic abuse for the survivor, where one's attention and energy that used to have to be focused on the narcissist gets to be redirected towards oneself through noticing oneself, prioritizing one's own personal and inner experience, and strengthening the connection to that inner experience, and ultimately bringing that connection into new relationships where the goal becomes to add to that sense of connection to oneself. And that is in sharp contrast to what relationships had to mean when a narcissist was involved. In those cases, the narcissist demands one abandon the connection to oneself and put the connection to the narcissist above all else, especially above oneself. So in today's video, I'm going to discuss a little bit about how that comes to be, where the connection gets prioritized to the narcissist rather than to oneself for the survivor, how that sort of stance of fixedness or occupation about the narcissist or even others can sort of persist after the abuse. And finally, to offer a few ways to disrupt the connection towards others. And by others, I mean in this way of sort of the other demanding all attention towards them at the expense of the connection towards oneself. So disrupting that and nurturing the connection one has towards oneself. You know, as I talk about connection to oneself versus connection to others, there's sort of a nebulousness to what is meant. You know, that these aren't, you know, it's not like saying, hey, that's a table over there and that's a shoe over there. When we talk about a connection to oneself versus connection to others in this sort of narcissistically induced way. So I hope at least metaphorically it makes some sense. And I hope that the way it gets talked about today will kind of add some more specifics to what is meant by these terms or these concepts. Okay, so why is the connection to the self often so weakened in the process of being narcissistically abused? Well, one way to sort of think about the narcissist's sort of objective when they are, relocating their own worthlessness into, in essence, their victim, is that narcissist is trying to leverage his or her power and authority in the relationship to coerce the victim to believe that the narcissist's opinion of him or her is more important than that person's opinion about him or herself. And, when I say they will leverage power and authority, it can get fairly vicious where the narcissist may spare no cruelty in enforcing this outcome. So they may actually look for signs in the victim that person is, say, paying more attention to themselves than the narcissist, and go in on that victim all the more viciously to condition the victim not to prioritize him or herself above the narcissist, and rather generating enough fear of the sort of consequences faced by the narcissist that victim is forced to survive by prioritizing the narcissist above him or herself. For example, I don't know if there's a survivor of narcissistic abuse who is not familiar with being called selfish by the narcissistic person who abused them. And what selfish, I think, can mean in these scenarios is that the victim is committing the heavy quotes here, transgression of turning towards themselves rather than completely towards the narcissist, what the narcissist needs, affirming what the narcissist thinks. To not be sort of constantly at the ready to offer that to the narcissist can constitute, in the narcissist's mind, a reason to punish his or her victim. So, for example, for another sort of fictional, let's say client, person in recovery, let's say there's a person named Sarah, and Sarah had a very narcissistic father. Sarah found happiness in helping others. That was just sort of part of how she was brought, part of who she was coming into this world. And that characteristic of hers made her father, who worked as a, let's say, a principal in a school district, often enraged because he sort of lived a life, at least as I like to think about it, I think that he lived a life that had the trappings of someone who wanted to help others and derived real meaning from it. But meanwhile, behind closed doors, would really viciously abuse Sarah and his spouse. And so when Sarah would recall finding herself drawn to charitable activities, and one thing she got involved with was Habitat for Humanity in her high school years. And initially the father sort of tolerated this, but at one point, after a long day Sarah spent at the Habitat for Humanity construction site, which is it's an organization that builds homes, I think, free of charge for needful families of shelter. Anyway, so when Sarah gets home, her father just flies into a rage and accuses her of being someone who's a do-gooder, or at least likes to portray herself as a do-gooder, but meanwhile leaves all her familial duties undone and ignores the chores and needs of the family. I think this example is relevant because Sarah's father was targetedly trying to disrupt her connection with this quality within herself of being someone who derives genuine meaning by helping others. And I suspect that her father found her connection with this quality within herself to threaten his sense of control over her. And again, by control, what I mean is that he may have worried that she could be beginning to care more about her own opinion about herself and this really just genuine good quality she possesses over his opinion of her. And his vicious character assassinating and undermining attack on her supposed motivation for being involved in Habitat for Humanity, I think really reflects his very pathological need to control where she directed her attention and focus, and that would be towards him rather than to herself. And he was adamant in making sure she not see what she really had as a person when she looked at herself. So those accusations that she was just trying to be a do-gooder were meant to distort, in essence, her vision of herself. So to just, in essence, not risk that vicious assault from the narcissist by just working to keep the focus, or one's own focus, on that narcissist rather than oneself, can be a critical way to survive such treatment, such relationships, such upbringings in childhood. And I think particularly, even if it starts in childhood, one's own nervous system, I think, can be sort of primed to sort of look outward. and sort of make sure that one kind of internalizes this rule that it's wrong, prohibited, actually, in fact, dangerous to focus on oneself before focusing on the other, and so doing is very helpful to the survivor at the time that they're facing and in close quarters with the narcissist. Once recovery becomes possible, meaning that there's a sufficient amount of safety between oneself and one's narcissistic abuser, and safety can, it needs to include psychological safety or a buffer, emotional, and often physical, in whatever form it concretely takes. Once this safety is felt, it becomes possible to gradually and gently and incrementally redirect one's attention back inward to notice oneself and one's experience, and to, in essence, turn away or finally ignore the other. And I think what can happen through the course of this is that one gets to sort of rediscover other people in a way that does not involve losing connection with what one is experiencing oneself. That the narcissist is sort of gets lost, and ultimately that's a very good outcome. And what is found is a much more reciprocal, mutual other to whom one gets to kind of be in connection with, in addition to the connection they hold with themselves. And this becomes a very important shift in a survivor's outlook of what relationships mean. They get to know that it's not a set of conditions imposed by the other person which they must adhere to or else, but rather it can be an arrangement where the survivor's first priority gets to be cultivating a relationship with their own thoughts, sensations, perceptions, even their breath. And as this relationship grows stronger, then he or she gets to be in contact with others in ways that add to that connection to him or herself rather than compromise it. And this can often be a wildly unfamiliar, though I think way more comfortable way of experiencing oneself while in the company of others. But it's, I think, such an outcome well worth working towards. And again, like in every week, I just want to emphasize how much of a process this is, and that there are good reasons why it can feel very intolerable at times to notice inward rather than sort of keep attention and focus and energy directed outward. And I mean, we just think about the dynamics of narcissistic abuse. The narcissist worked very hard to relocate a sense of worthlessness into the victim. And a part of recovery is the sort of expunging of this sense of worthlessness that was never one's own. But at the beginning, that's often not in an inner way and sort of experiential way known by the survivor. So what it can feel like to turn inward is to sort of be face to face with what can feel like this wretched sense or that this is who one is, and that one can feel sort of all alone with that worthlessness, and almost too as though it's a permanent state, that it's not going to shift or it's not impermanent. Those experiences of being alone with the worthlessness and that it's permanent, I think, are also features of the process of abuse itself. And that's what the narcissist, him or herself, could not tolerate and force their victim to feel so that the narcissist did not have to. Nonetheless, it's hard. It can make it difficult in the beginning to sort of stay turned inward to oneself. And so, again, the sort of the empathy and the attitude of patience and crediting oneself for this kind of work that one is engaging in to kind of find and connect to one's authentic self is just so important. That there isn't a sort of or that one gets to work against any inclination to be punitive towards oneself for, at times needing to focus back outward or having a hard time keeping one's attention or sitting still with oneself. I mean, doing that for a moment, say one day, it can be built upon. And that's, I think, the message in all of this is that everything is sort of incremental, and it's a real sort of, it has a linear trajectory, but there's expected to be kind of, I guess, a sine wave, ebbs and flows in that along that trajectory. And so why does this sort of focus outward, when it sort of maybe began by it being necessary to focus on the narcissist rather than oneself, persists, say, after the bout of narcissistic abuse is sort of complete? One thing I think we have as humans after we've gone through something really, really terrible is this kind of, I don't know if it's a desire or a reflex or something to fix on what happened, to look at it, think about it, notice it, try to delve into it, and maybe most of all, understand it. That reflex can be important in just kind of gaining coherence as to what happened. But also, it can have I think, unintended impact of keeping one more focused on the narcissist than on oneself, and almost where to say turn away from the kind of the awfulness of the what was experienced in the course of the narcissistic abuse can sometimes grow to feel like, well, what is one turning towards, or who am I? What do I have left if I'm not trying to figure all of that out? And breaking or interrupting that kind of fix on what happened and the narcissist and all that involves can be a very important part of the process of recovery. And I think it, again, requires sort of compassion with oneself, gentleness, but also grit and tolerance to kind of sit with that uncertainty or that sort of maybe even emptiness that can be there if one isn't sort of thinking more and more about what happened back then when being narcissistically abused, and sort of sitting with who one is and what one is experiencing in the present. As I've said, I think that people who survive narcissistic abuse, who have been in the scapegoated role, tend to possess a lot of really great qualities that can really offer them so many benefits when they're directed in the service of themselves. And so, a sense of compassion or toughness, all those things can be leveraged, again, incrementally and over time, to help the survivor, break the focus on the narcissist and redirect that focus inward and sort of stick with the focus there. Stick with one's present experience. And I'll discuss a little bit more about how one can concretely do that. And I want to emphasize that in breaking the sort of fix, I guess it can be called, we can think of it as sort of a fixation. And I don't mean in a pejorative way, just a descriptive way, that a fixation on sort of on the narcissistic abuse and what it was like, I want to distinguish that from sort of minimizing the trauma or sort of saying that it wasn't so bad or anything like that, or dismissing one's pain. It's not that. And so, in essence, it's sort of something like, that was awful and that happened. And I'm redirecting my attention to oneself right now because I am more than that and sort of always have been. And so ways to kind of concretely do that, I think first and foremost can involve just one's breath. Oftentimes the mind can really kind of go into so many elaborations of, what's going on, how do things feel, how can one solve things so that they don't feel so bad or that they feel better. And to sort of interrupt that and just kind of bringing the focus back to one's breath just is a very good way to reconnect to oneself. And coupled with that can be this sort of practice of mindfulness, where whatever one is experiencing while also tracking one's breath. And I might add that it can be useful and soothing to the nervous system to inhale through the nose and exhale through the nose. There is sort of there are advocates for breathing through the nose and exhaling through the mouth, and that can be very relaxing. But at the same time, this breathing through the nose and exhaling through the nose can sometimes be a little less disruptive and allow one to sort of more gently notice and track one's breath. So just as a side note. But so also invoking a sort of a mindful attitude towards whatever one is experiencing internally, where we're noticing what we're thinking, feeling, sensing, and that's it. Noticing it and bringing one's attention back to the breath. And when I say noticing it, what I mean is sort of like not seeing it as a thought, let's say, as something that demands a response, or a feeling as something that will grow too big if one doesn't, again, respond to it, is just to say, I'm feeling tense. Okay, and bringing one's attention back to the breath. Or I can't believe, I was forced to be treated that way, as a thought. And okay, I noticed that as a thought. And, coming back to the breath. And so on and so on. And keeping in mind, and I know this is still just a thought, but that all of these thoughts and feelings are always impermanent. That one thing that gets to be experientially, I think, realized in redirecting one's attention back to your breath and cultivating this sort of mindful attitude is that it's all impermanent. It all sort of, takes on a certain pitch when a thought or feeling arises, and if it's just noticed and other thoughts don't attach to it, then it kind of on its own will kind of decay and a new thought or feeling emerges. But what is constant is the breath. And so, this is just one sort of tactic that can be leveraged to nurture a connection with oneself and one's own experience. A lot can come out of it, but it's sort of like to be discovered. And all that sort of one can control is where we direct our attention via the mindfulness, and to notice that we're continuing to breathe through it all. In I think subtle and very powerful ways, this flouts the sense of danger that was experienced in being victimized by a narcissist. Well, thank you for watching today. I really, just want to thank everyone again for your continued engagement with this channel, and I hope that today's video was of some help. And stay tuned next week, where there'll be another video at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Take good care.